I guess we can start today. Thank you for joining. Before we will start, I have a question for you. How many backend developers do we have today here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, it's a lot of. Okay, cool. How many front-end guys? Nice. And marketing people? All right, cool. Good to know. Again, thanks for joining. So today I'm going to talk about the type data, which is very important and low-level API in Drupal. And in the same time, I would say it's very well undocumented one. So that is why oftentimes it stays quite a mystery for many. And today I will try to get to the bottom of it and hopefully finally leave you with some thoughts and understanding of this topic, because on top of this API, a lot of stuff is built in Drupal, which you will quickly see on the presentation. Yeah, I will give a few seconds for the guys to have a seat, feel comfortable. By the way, you are backend developers or front-end guys? Backend developers, that's cool. All right. So, a few words about me. I'm Piotr Pakulski. I'm from Poland, so I took a pretty short train ride to meet with you guys today. I work for Box. You may ask, that's great, but what the Box is? So Box is a company which is providing services for content cloud, the enterprise size. So we have at least 75,000 clients right now, and more than 70% of Fortune 500 companies can be called our customers. That's great, you may say, but what is the Drupal role there? So basically, Drupal is not connected to our product. Product is something completely different. Drupal is used to handle all the marketing sites that we have a bunch of. So I am one of the developers working remotely with the team from US and helping the marketing team to achieve their goals via Drupal-powered websites. Cool. So I'm a PHP developer for nearly 15 years right now, or something like this. I started working with Drupal from the late version 7. By the way, who has some experience with 7? Okay, all right, nice. So I was a little bit late on the party comparing to some speakers that I've seen today and yesterday. Before that, I used to be a Symfony developer, so it was pretty interesting transition for me, because when I joined the Drupal team, guys were asking me about some Symfony-related stuff, because it was going to show up in Drupal 8, because Drupal is using some bundles from Symfony. So it was pretty interesting. You can find me on socials, like, of course, Drupal.org and LinkedIn. Cool. I also want to say a big thank you for the whole DrupalCamp Berlin team. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, so thank you for letting me to speak here today. And it's also a very well organized event, and I'm first time attending an event where the rooms are so different. Yeah. One small info, I'm organizing the Global Contribution Weekend in Warsaw in upcoming 2025, which is from 25 to 26 January, as usual. So you have the direct train connection to Warsaw from Berlin. So you can take the train. Whenever you will get out on the Warsaw station, it's about 2-minute walk to the tallest building in United Europe. And there will be the event. So we'll provide some food, drinks, and so on. So feel free to register. You can scan the code if you wish to the registration form or to the event link. So keep it in mind. Thank you. So what's the agenda for today's presentation? So we will start answering some questions. Why we need type data and some low-level representation for data. What are the limitations of PHP? What were the limitations coming straight from Drupal 7? Then how the process of implementing the API was looking like, how was the history looking like, what was the ongoing process on Drupal.org, and so on. Then whenever we'll be able to understand the history of this API, we will go to something more complex, which will be the content entities. So I will try to quickly show you how things are built on top of this API, and hopefully left you with some at least basic understanding of this. In the very end of the session, we'll go through some code examples and use cases, so you can see where and how you can use this API, and maybe where you are already using it. And in the very end, a few minutes for questions. Okay, because we have so many good and experienced backend developers here, I have a very important question for you guys. Anyone knows how many variable built-in types PHP currently has? I have some tips, starting from string, bool, and so on. Throw some numbers into me. 10, okay. 11. 20. 8. You are the closest person to the right answer. Currently, we have 9. I was always thinking something around 7. So isn't it remarkable? So we have so many good developers here, and we weren't quite sure how many basic built-in types we have in PHP. So this might be the first reason why probably we need some data representation in Drupal to be something more sophisticated. So looking quickly what we have some basic types like null, bool, integer, float, string, array, object, and the 2 additional ones, which are callable and resource. I was not aware of them. So callable might be something like a function or a method in a class. So then whenever it's going to be called user func, it's a callable. And resource, as you can see, is some resource outside of PHP. So there you go. These are the 2 additional types that we have in PHP. All right, so we refreshed our knowledge about PHP. So we are climbing up pretty quickly into the complexity level. So why we need type data in the light of PHP? We cannot rely off the type of certain data. So we cannot be oftentimes sure what will be the exact type that we will receive from external API, external method, class, and so on. So that is why we probably need something more sophisticated. And oftentimes, 1 is not 1, depending what's the current representation. And because PHP, as we all know, is loosely typed language, we cannot be always sure. And we oftentimes use the loose comparison, which is not good in the end of the day. So there you go. We often use the loose comparison. All right, let's flex our brains once again. We have these 2 integers. I have a question for you. What's the difference between them? Anyone spot any differences?
One is bigger than the other.
That's a good answer, but something more?
Maybe one is outside of the integer.
Once again?
Maybe the right one is outside of the integer.
No. These are just normal integers. All right, so I will help you a bit with that. So the first one is a timestamp, and the second one is not. And in PHP, we do not have any differentiator to say that the first one is indeed a timestamp. So there we go. However, in some cases, it's useful to be able to define some kind of abstract type. Cool. So we know what are the reasons coming straight from PHP. Let's have a look in the history. What was the problem with Drupal 7? That is why I was asking who was familiar with Drupal 7. So back the day, if you probably remember, in Drupal 7 we had this giant associative arrays to represent everything. And because of that, there were a couple of problems. So it was no consistent way of defining data types, timestamp, string, and so on. We cannot easily say if field is translatable. It was possible, but it was quite a tricky thing in Drupal 7. Access levels were hard to define. Who can edit, delete, and so on. And probably the most famous hook field validate. If anyone remembers the giant hook where we placed all our validations for forms. So it was very decoupled from the form API and field API, right? And last but not least, hard to build machine-readable API for the data access. What it means, you can quickly go and see the Drupal 7 REST module, how a big struggle it was to traverse up and down throughout the structures of the giant associative arrays in Drupal 7 back in the day, because we didn't have any abstract representation. Okay, so of course community was aware of these problems, so they've decided to solve it. So this is the Drupal org thread when all this story started. First of all, they were probably trying to figure out, do we have anything in Symfony, to add something more on top of our representations, but there is no such a module in Symfony, at least as far as my knowledge is right. So they decided to implement API to unify entity properties and fields. It was more about decoupling the field API and refactoring it. And during the process, they were thinking, how are we going to name our new API, low-level API? There was some ideas like, let's call it metadata, let's call it property API, but finally they decided, okay, let's give it the name, the type data. So that is why the name is like this. And probably this is the post where they decided that, okay, let's go with type data. So I don't know, at least for me, the metadata probably will be the better naming because of it gives straightforward explanation what this API is doing. Of course, as usual in the community, there was a very important question. Why another low-level API, guys? Isn't it overkill to implement a low-level API just for the sake of describing the entity properties? But the community was able, oh my gosh, the resolution is pretty bad. The community was able to identify a bunch of points that will be beneficent from this API, including property API, blocks, layouts, rules, action APIs, tokens, CMI, metadata, semantic mappings, and even template variables. So yes, there you go. We have the decision that we are going to implement this API. The community prepared a short description how it is going to look like, that the type data API will be a module that will consist data lists, complex data, and data primitives, pretty straightforward. But what's very important is that all the representations should be easily mapped to the built-in primitives. Why? Because they have back of their heads that we should have easily machine-readable way to represent the data in as many formats as we wish, right? So they build these potential data types that we will represent in our type data, including something like string, boolean, integer, float, URI, and so on. What I would like you to take attention to is to going from left to right, how each type will be casted to some primitive representations. Why? As I said, to be machine readable, to easily cast data from abstract representation to JSON API, whatever it is. So for example, the duration might be represented quickly into the plain value, which is date interval. Then it can be easily casted to string or an integer or whatever we want to have. So that was the plan. And the second most important thing that they were thinking about, that we would like to have as many as possible nested levels and complexity levels in the abstract representation. So that is why probably this is a simple example how we would like to map some simple JSON into this type data representation. The work was going on further, and community decided, okay, this is so complex that we should probably create another Drupal org thread just to separate it from the refactoring of the field API. So they created this Drupal thread, and the title is answering on all our questions probably. The type data API is allowing metadata to be associated with data. So we have some data and we want to add some more information, which I will quickly explain to you just in the next slides. As you can see, which is not so expected, it's closed and fixed, which is good. So it was the version 8.0x. So finally in Drupal 8, we welcome this beautiful abstract representation for the data. So you can compare what we had in Drupal 7 and in Drupal 8. Going from the top to the bottom, you have entity. Entity, as expected, may have some properties. These properties may have some items. And finally, the items may have some values. So finally, you have some abstract representation of this giant associative arrays. Cool. We are good with the history. So we know why, we know how the process was looking like. And now you may ask me, where should I go besides joining this presentation to know more about this API? Of course, you can go to Drupal.org, where you will find some modest description, very modest description, with some basics and a stream of class names, interfaces names, and so on. That's completely fine, I guess. But at least for me, it was not so informative, and I was still, everything was blurred for me after reading this. So maybe I will contribute to that one day to make it more readable. You can find there my favorite diagram, which I was revisiting for many, many times, but I'm still not sure if I understand it. So don't worry, I'm not going to try to put this today on today's session. I'm just calling it chicken diagram because this is what it usually correlates with me. Okay, so if not Drupal.org, what else you can do? You can, of course, get one of the Daniel Sipos books. Drupal 8, in my case, was the book, and right now I guess you have the Drupal 10 module development. I've checked what's the difference between the type data description between these two books, and it's completely nearly the same. So what you will find there is nearly 7 pages from 6 and something 100 pages book dedicated by the author to this API. You will find class names, interfaces names, just a flood of everything, but also some good examples. And even the author on the very end of this section is saying that, I know, that was the very difficult section to follow, just don't worry, you can always go back, I just want you to know that we have this type of API in Drupal. So what I have done, I've simply digested all this stuff that I was able to find, and probably I will try to provide it to you today with some shortcuts and simple versions, right? By the way, I'm strongly believer that this book is obligatory book for every Drupal developer on some point of his career, but stay alerted during the process. At least for me, it was super time consuming, and probably your family will start to hate you and you will start losing friends, but there you go. It is what it is. So what is type data? Type data, as I said, is wrapping some random piece of information into something more meaningful. The good example might be the license plate. As you can see in European license plate, you have at least 4 pieces of information here, which is the flag of the Europe, number, some letters, and the country identifier. Sorry for the Spanish country identifier. Usually I'm changing it for the current place where I'm speaking, but this is left over from the Barcelona DrupalCon. So yes, we have random 3 pieces of information and wrapped together, it's giving you additional meaning. So first of all, it wraps values of any kind of complexity. This is very straightforward example, but you can imagine we have very, very complex structures wrapped together, which I will quickly show in the next examples. Secondly, it gives meaning to the data it wraps. So now we know that this is a license plate. Cool. Let's see on the main components that we have in this API. So the complexity is right now quickly, again, rising up. So stay alerted. But I will try to do it with some good, straightforward examples. Let's imagine we are in the kitchen, all right? So we have some ingredients. And these ingredients in our API will be plugins. So we have ingredients. The next thing we have, anyone knows what this might be? A list of ingredients is a recipe. I can hear some. So yes, we have recipe, but this recipe in our API is called definitions. It's pretty self-explanatory. So we have ingredients and definitions, but the definition, the recipe is a little bit different than the normal one. Why? Because indeed we have these ingredients, but at this point we do not have values, so we do not know how much milk we need, how many eggs, and so on. So we have these 2 ingredients. And the third one, the last one, any ideas who else is needed here to make the result? I don't get it. Who might be this guy? He has the ingredients, he has the recipe. There you go, he is a chef. And in our API, he is a manager, type data manager. So we have ingredients, definitions, and the manager. And hopefully these three correlations, memorizations will stay with you for a bit longer than 5 minutes after the session, because these are the three main components in this pretty complicated API. And this is how things are working under the hood. So having ingredients, having recipe, and the chef, as a result, we might expect something beautiful like a cake. So this is the first level of complexity. Then, when comes more people and more food, we are building more complex structure, which might be a beautiful dinner. So whenever people met together in beautiful dinners, hopefully one day someone will get married, which is a very complex structure oftentimes. So you can see how starting from simple egg or a glass of milk, we are heading up to even marriage. So this is how things are working in Drupal. And in the very bottom, we have our API. Cool. Let's go with some code example. Because I know this is IT industry, I want to show you the Friday example, which should be pretty straightforward. But before I start, I want to be sure that we are standing at the same point. Everyone is sure what this Friday is, sunny side up, or not? Just to be sure, this is the Friday. So this is what we are going to build in code using our API. Cool. Hopefully this should be visible in the end. So we'll need some ingredients, some plugins wrapped with definitions. This is the first level of complexity. So we'll need just one egg, salt, pepper, and butter. These are our ingredients, just to be straightforward. Okay. So then we will need the recipe for it. So we have ingredients. Now we will need a recipe. So we are using map data definition. You may ask me, okay, man, but what is the map data definition? Definition is a recipe, and map is something that community think about, like, all right, what we'll do with the giant associative arrays. Let's create the abstract representation, which will be a map. So map is simply representing the all giant associative arrays from 7. So we have map, and we are wrapping all the properties, which will be the items on our recipe. So we set the label that this is a fried egg better recipe, and then defining some properties like the egg, salt, pepper, and butter, and there you go. So we have recipe, we have ingredients. Who else is needed? Of course, the chef, which is type data manager. And what's important here, as I said, finally at this point he is grabbing the values and injecting into the recipe. So chef is creating the result. And what's important at this stage is that just because we have the correct keys in the associative array, all the values are automatically attached to the correct properties. So you can see at this point, even if it is a very, very straightforward example, that we have machine readable way or machine possible way to handle data. So we have our fried egg instance. What we can do with it? We can get the definition, which is the recipe. We can get the label from the recipe to know what we have done. We can get one level down to the ingredients. We can get this ingredient called salt and get the value, get the label, and so on. So we can already see how it is easy to traverse up and down throughout the structure whenever it might be complicated, right? So on each level, you can do some findings there. Okay, that was pretty straightforward, but let's move on to something more complex. I'm going to introduce these icons for you today, which are the plugins, ingredients, recipe, and the chef, just to make it way easier to understand what we are talking about and how the entities are modeled on top of our API. So bear this in mind. So how our example will look like then. We have the ingredients, butter, egg, and so on. This is wrapped together into some recipe, right? This is the recipe. And then comes the manager, and the manager indeed is injecting some values into the recipe, and as a result, we have the fried egg. There you go. This is the icons representation for the complicated problem. Then you can get this. This is the fried egg, and even more, so we can have beautiful breakfast. Then even something more complicated, like a recipe for a beautiful, I don't know, holidays. And then in the end, we end up with something super complicated. But this is not the end. You can build on top of this even more complicated structures, and one day you may decide that you want to occupy Mars. So this is how you go going from the simple egg to occupying Mars in type data. Okay, so this is the final thing which I promised you to show, which is how entities in Drupal are built on top of our API. And I prepared a very good, simple image showing up what's the case. So the first turtle on the rock, which is stuck, is our API. Then comes another one asking, do you need help, man? There you go. Let's help me. And then somehow the second one is on top of him. And then the turtles are piling and piling up. All the new APIs and structures in Drupal are piling up, and just don't ask, go on the top. So at the very bottom here, we have our API. And one day, and probably you've experienced that, when you are debugging some structures in Drupal, you may have a feeling that things are looking like that. Just because on the very bottom is our API and everything is piling up on top of it. Cool. Now, let's flex our brains. I will, do we have any UI designers? I can see that we have one front-end developer. Any UI designers? There you go. This will be a perfect example why backend developer should never be a UI designer, by the way. So let's start. How the entities are built in Drupal. So as you know, we have two types of fields, the base fields and the configurable fields. Let's see what we have in base fields. We might expect some recipe for the base field. So we have the base field definition or base field override. So this is the recipe. I'm not going to any further details. What's the difference between these two guys? So whenever you will change in something in the base fields, it needs to be exportable. So it then gets to be base field override. That is why it is like this. So then whenever the manager is injecting any values in it, it's going to be an instance of field item list, which are representing the base fields. Next to the base fields, we have configurable fields. And this is a completely different story, of course, more complicated, why not? We may expect some recipe, but we have field config. Come on, man, why field config? Field config, configuration T, but this guy implements data definition interface. Why? Because it plays two roles here. So besides being the recipe, the definition, it's also a configuration. Why? Because all the configurable fields needs to be exportable in Drupal. That is why it plays two roles here, but still we may treat it as a recipe. Again, and the manager injecting values, as a result, field item list. Then, when we have the fields, we are wrapping it together with something, some more meaning. And there you go. We have a recipe for entity data definition, which extends complex data definition base. This is a very good name because it's complex. And the complex definition base is on blue, and I want you to take attention on all the blue names you will see quickly in the next slides and this slide, because the blue names are coming straight from type data API. So type data API is providing the recipe for complex data definition base, and entities are built on top of this. So we have the recipe for the entity. Whenever the manager is injecting any values into it, as a result, we might expect entity adapter. You've probably seen this name a couple of times whenever you are debugging whatever you are doing with the values in Drupal. And this guy extends straight from type data, as you can see also coming from our API. And this is simply data type plugin that defines entity data type. There you go. This is the representation of entity in Drupal using our API. But this is not the end. I promise you we'll get to the bottom of it. So let's have a look. Maybe not the configurable fields. It's a bit more complicated. You can always go to the Daniel Sipos book. Let's have a look on the base fields. What we have inside. Do we have any type data there? Okay, so you might expect we will have some, as again, recipe for the very good start, which is field item data definitions. I can see guys are trying to look, but this is a field item definition. And on top of this definition, whenever the manager is injecting any values, you may expect some kind of field type, depending what the field is. In my example, the field type will be a string, just for the ease. So it will be some kind of a field type. In our example, it's string item that extends string item base. And this guy extends map plugin. So our favorite map coming straight from type data. So you can see on the very bottom that already we have type data in the, as the lowest turtle in the stack. Then another field, And then we are wrapping this field together with some more meaning. And this is base field definition, which again extends straight from list data definition that is coming straight from type data. So we have type data, then injecting some values into it. There you go. As a result, you have a field item list, which extends straight from item list, which is coming also straight from type data. So type data, and type data. That is why this is so important to at least know that we have this API and why and from where this is coming from, right? And what are the historical reasons for that. Cool. I can see that the brains are burning right now, at least mine. So now we will go with something less complicated. Let's have a quick look what core data types, what plugins currently we have comparing to the what the community was expecting to have. As you can see, the list is a little bit longer. We have items like any, which I will talk about in a second. Binary, Boolean, datetime, decimal, which I will also talk about in a second. Duration, email, float, integer, item list. So you can see it's pretty similar to the types we have in Drupal, but it's metadata representation, additional representation for them. Item list, which you remember from the entities example I've just shown. Languages, the famous problems with languages in Drupal 7. Language reference. Map, which is covering everything you cannot cover with anything else. String, time, timestamp, and URI. There we go. I was curious what the any is. Actually, any is in core, and it may contain any PHP data for which no further metadata is available. So this is just a backdoor. Whenever you have something that cannot be covered by any other type, you can use the any. And the question is it used anywhere in the core? Yes, it's used, for example, in the datetime item. As you can see, the property is built on the data definition created on the any type. Okay, so we have the list of types. We know that any is used in core. And how about the decimal type? The decimal type was not there, but after presenting this session in Polish DrupalCamp, which Grzegorz is organizing, by the way, next year in Warsaw, in when? June 7th, all right? So we can take the train again to Warsaw. After presenting this session, one of Polish contributors, Grabber, asked me, come on, man, do you know that we have this Drupal.org thread hanging from 2017 about the decimal item? I was pretty stunned, and we quickly go through it, and it's straightforward. We can solve this. So we quickly pushed solution, and it was tested, approved, and right now we have decimal item in the core, which is my very small brick after this session, which I'm very proud about. So, okay, right now I will show you, we have 7 minutes still, some examples showing what the API is looking like in code, how you can use it. So the good place to start is, probably you know this guy, Matt Glaman, if I'm not messing about with his name, but you can go to this GitHub repository, you can scan the code here to it, and there you will find some good examples with type data code. So what you can find there is some examples of primitives, maps, lists, and serialization is quite not ready yet. But going with some primitives, you can see that we can create the definitions for email, how you can add the constraints, how different it is from Drupal 7, and so on. And of course, the manager is injecting some values and how you can validate it or assert it, and so on. This is primitive example. And the map example, if you are curious what the map is, the most common used one. So we have the manager, the chef, and then we have the map definition, setting some properties, pretty straightforward, like number, currency code. This is some currency representation, I guess. So we have at least 2 levels of complexity, adding some constraints, requirements, and so on. And then in the very end, of course, the manager is injecting values into it, and you can easily assert it. Cool. So you can go there to see more examples, and maybe you will see how you can use it in your everyday life. The next good example is this 5jars blog. You can also scan the code and go there. Basically, this blog is showing how you can use type data to easily digest JSON representation. Just using, if you build the correct data type representation, you will have to only use one line to digest the JSON. I will quickly go through it. So You can imagine we have this very simple JSON string. I've shown it in the very beginning. And we want to digest it just using one-liner, okay? Just after we've prepared the right abstract representation for it. So we have at least 2 levels of complexity. This is the first level we would like to map, which will be result, status, and command. There you go. This is the first level of complexity. The second level will be some results data, and here we will have just simple primitive representations. So what we will need? As we know, we will need recipes and ingredients, so definitions and plugins. So let's go with the recipes then. So first of all, let's handle the first level of complexity, which will be the recipe for response definition. We are going to set some simple properties like status, command, and result. This is pretty straightforward because we are using the primitive representations for them. But the results will be the second level of complexity. So we are going to use some custom representation, which will be demo results, which will be then injected into the list data definition coming straight from type data. So we have representation for the first level of complexity, then going to the, then preparing the the plugin for it, which will be the demo results, as I show you here. So we have the plugin, and then the recipe for the second level of complexity, which is pretty straightforward. We have there the title, body, and author, which will be this level, title, body, and author, and this is a recipe for it, and we'll need custom definition for it, which will be called demo response, and this guy is going to wrap everything together. Okay, so we've prepared four files to represent the data, and now all the magic. First of all, we'll need to instantiate the definition based on our demo response, which I've just created here. We have, of course, the chef, which is the type data manager. Then, of course, we'll need the data from the API, right? So we'll JSON decode all the JSON to represent it in the associative array. And in the very end, as I promised you, it's just one line to digest the JSON. And there you go. As a result, you will have instance of representation of our JSON that we had. Everything is described in many details because I'm slowly running out of time in the 5 jars blog. So this is probably the most often scenario to use directly this API to digest some external APIs. But as I show you, it's everywhere. It's everywhere in the very bottom. So hopefully, these 3 icons will stay with you. I'm not expecting that everyone will know how the API is working, but at least that we have these 3 ingredients, which is the recipes, plugins, and the chef, the manager. So thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. And thank you for our sponsors. I'm open to any questions from you guys.
Most of the time we don't implement those validation constraints on the type data properties.
So
most of the time contrib modules, for example, if they provide a custom field type, most of the time the validation constraints are not directly tied to the type data properties in the field. They are more like validation on the field item level. So would you recommend to always push it down so that more field types should like implement it in a lower level, in a type data, or is there like a is it also okay, or is there some advantage, disadvantage to do it on the different levels, for example?
Okay, so just for the sake of recording, the question was that oftentimes in custom modules, we have some custom fields, right? Where was it? This one, for example. And is it better to add the constraints manually or whatever it might be? Or is it worth it to go to the low level? First of all, the question is what type of field it is, the custom field, and is it using already existing data types from the type data? I'm guessing it is using them. So the basic type data representations have basic validations attached to it already. So oftentimes the custom field does not have any additional validation, but whenever you will have something custom, you can always tie this into it. So I don't know if it is a good answer for your question. We can discuss it after the session, but I'm pretty sure that oftentimes everything is built, nearly 80% or 90% of the custom fields are on top of type data, and a lot of things are covered, like validations, constraints, and so on. So whenever you have to have something custom, then you can always add. But this is not a custom field. This is some abstract representation of something more complex. Field is a different story. Of course, it's also relying on type data, but this is abstract representation of something more, right? So you can have properties. You can represent these properties by fields, but this is something different. Thank you for the question. We have a question from UI designer.
Binary data properties, is it just used for like with a resource locator, or does it also take in any like base encoded real like log data, binary data? Can it also be used for that, or would you need a different?
Can you repeat the very beginning of your question, because I was far away? I'm not sure if I get it.
Okay. So there is the binary data property from the core.
Yeah.
But this only works with a resource locator, like having a string showing where the binary lies, or can it also take in a base encoded like data block, really showing binary data?
This is the question is about how the binary is represented, right? Straight from core. I don't know. I will have to look into it, but I'm guessing it's just some pointer to some database representation, whatever the database type is. I will have to go to the type. I cannot answer this question. Thank you for asking. Very good question for a UI designer. Anyone else?
Developer, not designer.
Sorry. Okay, so if there are no any more questions, remember about contributing, and feel free to join Warsaw Contribution Weekend in the very beginning of the year. Then there is, again, Polish DrupalCamp as each year, so see you there. Thank you very much.